Not all vulnerabilities are equal, and patching can't rely on guesswork. Vendors and the security community use scoring systems and frameworks to measure severity, predict exploitation, and focus resources. At the associate level, it's key to understand vendor ratings, CVSS, and how risk-based thinking shapes patch management. Vendor risk is one of the most overlooked but impactful areas of cybersecurity. Third-party suppliers, contractors, and service providers often have trusted access into corporate systems. That access creates an indirect entry point for attackers, making vendor vulnerabilities just as dangerous as those inside the organization itself. The Target breach of 2013 remains one of the most costly retail cybersecurity incidents in history. Attackers gained access through compromised credentials from a third-party HVAC vendor with remote connectivity. Because Target's internal systems lacked proper segmentation, the attackers moved laterally into the payment environment and deployed malware on point-of-sale systems. The result was the theft of over 40 million payment card numbers and personal data from 70 million customers. The impact included more than $200 million in costs, lawsuits, executive turnover, and long-term brand damage. The key lesson is clear. Strong vendor risk management and effective network segmentation are critical to protecting sensitive systems. To create consistency across vendors, the security community developed the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS. CVSS assigns each vulnerability a score from 0 to 10 based on factors like attack vector, attack complexity, privileges required, user interaction, and impact on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. For example, a flaw that allows remote code execution over the internet without authentication may score close to 10, while a local privilege escalation requiring an account may score closer to 6. CVSS is now the standard framework used in vulnerability scanners, advisories, and compliance reports, giving organizations a common scale to compare vulnerabilities and prioritize response. While CVSS is a valuable framework, it measures theoretical severity, not actual risk. A CVSS 9.8 vulnerability on an isolated test server may be less urgent than a 6.5 vulnerability on a public-facing e-commerce site. CVSS also doesn't account for whether exploits are circulating or being actively weaponized. Organizations that rely on CVSS alone risk chasing high scores instead of addressing real-world threats. Risk thinking bridges the gap between severity scores and real-world decision-making. In patch management, it's not enough to know how severe a vulnerability looks on paper. We also need to ask key questions. Is the flaw being actively exploited? Is the vulnerable system exposed to the internet or tucked away internally? What business processes or sensitive data does it affect? And are there compensating controls, like firewalls or segmentation, that reduce the likelihood of attack? By combining vendor ratings and CVSS scores with this kind of contextual risk thinking, organizations avoid both overreacting and underreacting. They can explain clearly which patches need urgent action and which can wait for scheduled maintenance. Section 2.5 emphasized that not all vulnerabilities are equal, and patching decisions can't rely on instinct alone. Standardized tools like vendor severity ratings and the Common Vulnerability Scoring System provide a common scale for comparing issues, but they reflect theoretical severity, not real-world risk. Risk thinking fills the gap by adding context: whether a flaw is being exploited, how exposed the system is, what business processes are impacted, and whether compensating controls are in place. By combining CVSS and vendor ratings with contextual risk analysis, organizations make smarter, defensible patching choices, ensuring urgent vulnerabilities are addressed quickly, while lower-risk issues follow in planned cycles. One of the first steps in deciding what to patch and when is classification. Security and IT teams need a common language to describe the severity of vulnerabilities so they can allocate resources appropriately. Without classification, every patch looks the same, which quickly overwhelms teams and creates confusion about priorities. Classifying vulnerabilities into categories such as critical, high, medium, and low, gives structure to patching decisions, provides a starting point for prioritization, and makes reporting easier to understand for executives and regulators. A critical vulnerability represents the highest level of risk. These flaws can allow complete system compromise, remote code execution without authentication, or direct loss of sensitive data. They are often network accessible, require little or no user interaction, and may already have active exploits circulating. Because the potential for damage is so great, ranging from business disruption to data theft and regulatory violations, organizations set strict deadlines for remediation. Many compliance frameworks mandate that critical vulnerabilities be patched within 7 to 30 days, and some organizations shorten that to as little as 72 hours when active exploitation is confirmed. High-severity vulnerabilities are also serious, but generally require more conditions for exploitation. They may depend on user interaction, elevated privileges, or access to specific network segments. If exploited, they can still cause major impact, including privilege escalation, denial of service, or exposure of sensitive data. Organizations treat high vulnerabilities as urgent, though not as time-sensitive as critical flaws. Patch timelines often range from 2 weeks to a month, depending on compliance requirements and business needs. Because high vulnerabilities make up a large share of patching workload, teams must balance urgency with available resources. Medium-severity vulnerabilities are less likely to be exploited or tend to have more limited impact. They may involve information disclosure, require highly specialized conditions, or affect non-critical systems. While they do represent risk, the effort for attackers is usually higher, and compensating controls often reduce urgency. Medium vulnerabilities are often scheduled into routine patch cycles, such as quarterly maintenance windows. Still, they shouldn't be ignored. Over time, they can be chained with other flaws to enable serious attacks or become more important if the business context changes. Low-severity vulnerabilities usually pose minor risks, such as cosmetic flaws, local information leakage, or weaknesses that are extremely difficult to exploit. They often have minimal impact on confidentiality, integrity, or availability. Many organizations patch these opportunistically when systems are already being updated, or classify them as patch when time permits. Still, they shouldn't be dismissed entirely. Even small flaws can serve as stepping stones, such as revealing version details that attackers can use to build more targeted exploits. Using a standardized classification system provides clear advantages. It creates consistency, allowing security and IT teams to quickly align on which vulnerabilities deserve urgent attention. It supports compliance, since frameworks like PCI DSS and HIPAA often reference severity categories in their patching requirements. It improves reporting, giving executives and auditors an easy way to understand risk without getting lost in technical detail. And it enables better resource allocation, ensuring scarce staff time is spent on the issues that matter most. In short, classification brings order to what would otherwise be an overwhelming flood of vulnerabilities. While severity classifications are useful, they're not perfect. In practice, severity doesn't always equal risk, and categories can create a false sense of security if used as the only factor for prioritization. Classifications are typically static, based on theoretical severity rather than real-time intelligence. A medium flaw may jump to top priority if proof of concept code is released, while a critical flaw may be irrelevant if it only affects unused software. Context matters too. A vulnerability on a payment system should be treated differently than the same flaw on a test server. Large enterprises often face thousands of findings, making it clear that classification alone can't cut through the noise. Finally, compliance frameworks often focus on critical timelines, but give little guidance for medium or low issues, leaving gray areas that require judgment. The takeaway: classification is a starting point, but risk-based thinking must guide patching decisions. Mature patch management programs understand that classification is just the starting point. True prioritization requires multiple inputs beyond severity ratings. Exploitability matters. If a vulnerability is actively being exploited, urgency increases. Exposure also counts. An internet-facing system demands faster patching than an isolated one. Business criticality plays a role too. Assets that drive revenue, handle sensitive data, or support essential services must be prioritized. Compensating controls such as firewalls or intrusion prevention may reduce urgency, while operational constraints can delay patching when uptime is critical. Finally, attackers often chain vulnerabilities together, turning minor flaws into major risks. By layering these factors on top of severity categories, organizations move from severity-driven patching to risk-based patching that better reflects real-world threats. It's important for associate-level practitioners to recognize that classification systems are incomplete by design. They simplify complex realities into categories that help with communication, compliance, and planning. That makes them necessary, but not sufficient. In practice, patch prioritization must combine classification with threat intelligence, business context, and awareness of the environment. A vendor-rated medium vulnerability may be the single greatest risk if it affects a mission-critical, internet-facing system with no compensating controls. Meanwhile, a critical flaw in unused software may not deserve urgent resources. The key lesson: severity scores are the starting point, but real prioritization requires context. For organizations beginning their patch management journey, adopting classification is the first step toward order and discipline. It helps teams avoid treating all vulnerabilities as equal and provides a defensible structure for reporting and compliance. As programs mature, they refine prioritization by adding factors like exploitability, exposure, business criticality, and compensating controls. In summary, critical, high, medium, and low classifications are useful tools, but they are not the full picture. They provide structure, but not a complete view of risk. Associate-level practitioners should see classification as a starting lens, not a final decision, an essential first filter that organizes vulnerabilities into manageable groups while leaving room for judgment and refinement. In Section 2.6, we saw that adopting classification is often the first step in bringing order and discipline to patch management. Classifying vulnerabilities as critical, high, medium, or low helps teams avoid treating all issues the same and creates a defensible structure for reporting and compliance. As organizations mature, they build on this foundation by incorporating exploitability, exposure, business criticality, and compensating controls into their prioritization decisions. In summary, classifications are valuable tools but not the whole story. They provide structure without capturing the full risk picture. For associate-level practitioners, classification should be viewed as a starting lens, not a final decision, an initial filter that organizes vulnerabilities into manageable groups while leaving space for judgment and refinement. Severity scores and vendor ratings are helpful starting points, but patch management decisions must ultimately be grounded in the business. Security doesn't exist in isolation. It exists to protect the systems that drive revenue, process customer data, ensure compliance, and keep operations running. Two vulnerabilities with identical severity scores may have very different consequences depending on which systems they impact. Business context transforms patch management from a technical checklist into a true risk management discipline. A vulnerability on a public-facing e-commerce platform that processes credit card payments demands much more urgency than the same flaw on a test system used only by developers. Similarly, in healthcare, a vulnerability on a patient record system carries higher stakes than one on an internal training portal. Business context helps security and IT teams weigh not just how dangerous a vulnerability looks in theory, but what the real-world consequences of exploitation would be in practice. Industry compliance frameworks often set patching priorities by mandate. PCI DSS, for example, requires critical patches within 30 days for systems handling payment card data. HIPAA expects timely updates for systems protecting patient health information. SOX emphasizes the accuracy and security of financial reporting systems, making patches on those platforms high priority. Beyond regulation, many customer contracts require timely patching or specific security practices. Failing to meet these obligations can lead to penalties, failed audits, or even lost business opportunities. At the associate level, applying business context comes down to asking simple, structured questions during prioritization. Is the system internet-facing, and therefore exposed to the widest range of attackers? Does it handle sensitive data such as PII, payment card details, or intellectual property, which demand rapid patching even for moderate flaws? Is the system critical to operations, where exploitation could disrupt customer services, financial transactions, or patient care? Are there compliance requirements like PCI DSS or HIPAA that define strict timelines? And finally, are compensating controls in place, segmentation, monitoring, or temporary mitigations that might allow safe delay? These questions provide a practical framework for aligning patching with real business risk. Bringing it all together, effective patch management requires combining simple business-focused questions with technical severity ratings to create a practical risk-based process. Instead of relying only on scores, teams ask, what would exploitation mean for our business? A CVSS 7.2 vulnerability on a point-of-sale terminal processing thousands of transactions daily is far more urgent than a CVSS 9.0 flaw on an isolated research server. Business context ensures that effort is directed where it prevents the most harm. The key takeaway is that patch management is not just about fixing technical flaws, it's about protecting the systems and processes that matter most to the business. By asking straightforward questions, even associate-level practitioners can prioritize intelligently and align patching with organizational needs. Section 2 introduced the many dimensions of patch management beyond simply installing updates. We saw that not all patches are the same. Hotfixes, service packs, and cumulative updates each carry unique implications for urgency, testing, and deployment. We also explored how vulnerabilities are not limited to operating systems. Firmware, drivers, and applications all require updates and bring their own risks if neglected. Out-of-band updates showed us how vendors release emergency fixes when attackers move faster than scheduled patch cycles, as in the Log4j case. Finally, we examined classification systems like critical, high, medium, and low, which bring order to vulnerability management, while also noting their limitations and the need to incorporate real-world context. The key message is clear. Patch management is a discipline that requires structure. By understanding patch types, asset layers, emergency updates, and classification systems, practitioners can move beyond reactive patching and build a program that balances speed, stability, and risk awareness.